Volume check 2.1, volume data check 2.1. Let's put the Nginx Proxy Manager on a Synology NAS, right? I just did all that networking 103, so why not put a reverse proxy on the Synology NAS? Even though I kind of didn't recommend doing it, but it's too late. I know that you did it anyways. So let's put Nginx Proxy Manager on here. If you're looking for it, it's just nginxproxymanager.com. If you Google it, it's probably going to be the first guy that shows up. So in nginxproxymanager.com, we're just going to click Get Started. And then on the left-hand side, we'll click Quick Setup. If you want a more complicated setup, you can do that. You can just go to, let me see here. You can just go to Setup Instructions, and then this will be, and then this will be the versions of Docker Compose that you can use that have databases and stuff. I don't really think you're gaining much by doing that, so that's why I recommend just going with the Quick Start. I'm gonna put my phone on silence here, otherwise you're gonna hear a lot of pingings. So let's just go back up to Quick Start and to Guide, and then Quick Setup. Quick Setup, not Quick Guide. Quick Setup. And we're just going to copy all of this text right here. This is the version that I would use if I was using Nginx Proxy Manager. I really don't need all the fancy database stuff. So I'm going to copy all this stuff here. Then I'm going to go back over to my Synology NAS. Here we are. And then let's click on Container Manager. So the only program you need to run this is Container Manager, which if you don't have, you can just come on over to the Package Center and type in Container Manager, and it will show up. That's pretty good. I spelled it pretty well. And then you should be able to install it here. If it's not showing up for you, that means Container Manager is not available on your model of Synology NAS, but maybe Google around and see if others have gotten it to work. So I got Container Manager here, and I'm going to scoot it over a little bit because I have to open up the file station soon. We're going to click on Project, Create, and then for project name, I'm going to call this guy Nginx Proxy Manager, which is a little long, but I'm doing it anyways. You can actually name it whatever you want. You can shorten it up if you want. You can actually just name it NPM. That's a common acronym, but I don't want to confuse you, so I'll use the full name. I'm going full pardons here. Under path, I'm going to create a path for all these Nginx files to live. So I'm going to click on File Station. I'm going to click on my Docker share, which you should have after you have installed Container Manager, and I'm going to type in Nginx Proxy Manager, which again, you might want to type in NPM because it is much shorter. So we got that folder in here. I'm going to go back to Container Manager. I'll click on Set Path, Docker, and I'll just use that folder that we just created, Nginx Proxy Manager. And then for source, we are not going to upload. We're going to create a Docker compose.yaml. So we're just creating a text file called dockercompose.yaml, and that's going to live in this folder here. And under here, we're just going to paste in all that information that we got from the Nginx Proxy Manager website. So a couple changes that we're going to have to make here. If you're not familiar with how Docker Compose works, it's basically just a way, it's kind of like you're creating your own installer for a program on your NAS. That's a very oversimplified way of thinking about this. So under image, it's going to download an image. You can see this :latest here. You'll see that in a lot of Docker Compose files. That just means it's downloading the latest version. And then restart unless stop. That just means whenever this program is, that just means if we restart our Synology NAS and start it back up, once Docker's up, this program's also going to automatically restart. So that's nice to have. But we need to change these port numbers here. So we're going to ignore what's to the right. Sort of. We're just not going to change anything that's to the right. We're not going to ignore it. We do need these. But we're just going to change what's to the left of that colon. So this is going to be how we and system stuff accesses this program. So instead of 80, we cannot use 80 or 443. And the reason for that is that your Synology NAS already uses these ports and uses it for its own reverse proxy. So I'm just going to add a 0 at the end of all of these numbers. So instead of 80, we're going to use port 800. It's going to be 810 and then port 4430. So that's how I'm going to do it. You can kind of change this to whatever you want. They can't be 80, they can't be 443. If you launch this and you run into a conflict where it says that port's already taken, you can just come back and change them though. So it's not a big deal, but I'm just going to add a 0 because I feel like that's pretty easy to remember. But yeah, pretty much any number under 64,000 should work fine here. And then volumes. So this is where Docker keeps persistent data. When you bring down and bring back up a Docker Compose or any sort of Docker program, basically it wipes all of that information. So what this is saying is, hey, I've got a couple folders inside of here though that it's going to keep data that you might not want to be deleted. And that's going to be stuff like creating login user accounts, or in the case of Nginx Proxy Manager, also whatever websites that you add to your reverse proxy for all your cool custom domain names. So instead of you having to retype all that stuff out every single time, this is where it will save that data for you. Pretty common in a program, but in Docker, you kind of have to set it up manually. So let's go back to the Nginx Proxy Manager folder, and I'm going to create a new folder called Data. I bet none of what I said made sense, does it? And then I'm going to create another folder called Let's Encrypt. And these have to be named exactly correct, or it's not going to work. So I've got a Data and a Let's Encrypt folder. And just to clarify, we are just editing what's to the left of that colon, just like with the port numbers. Actually, we're not making any changes here, but we could. So for example, I could name this Data NPM, but then I just have to make sure that this folder is also called Data NPM. I'm not going to do that. I'm just confusing you, but I just kind of want you to get an idea of how this works. So that's what that is referencing. And this period is just a shortcut for wherever I am. And in this case, it's going to this folder. So this period is actually the same thing as just typing in all of that. So I'm just going to use the period instead. I feel like using the period is good practice in case you ever need to put if you need to ever move a lot of your Docker stuff, it's nice to have the period there, because then instead of it searching for a specific folder, it just kind of stays within its own folder. It might also not make any sense, but one day it'll make sense. So we're pretty much set up, and this will launch, and this is the important port number to remember here, and that is this 810. Whatever number you put to the left of the colon of 81, this is how we're going to access Nginx Proxy Manager. So I'll just click Next. I am not going to set up a portal via WebStation. I will click Next, and then start the project once it is created, and then I will click Done. So this is not going to be a tutorial on how to use a reverse proxy. I have done a couple networking videos, though, that you might find are really useful for you. So 103 specifically goes over the reverse proxy stuff, but you might get a little lost if you didn't watch 101 or 102. There's also so many great resources out there for people that can show you how to use a reverse proxy and how to set it up. All right, we got exit code 0. That's a good sign. Everything is created and starting, and it is good. And then project Nginx Proxy Manager was successfully built. Awesome. I'm going to close out of this guy, and we can see we got the green light. Make sure that you got project selected, and then I'm going to just double click the Nginx Proxy Manager project and then click on this tab called YAML configurations. Look what we got here, all that Docker Compose text that we typed up. So if you ever needed to make any changes in here, you can actually just stop this container, and then it'll let you change these YAML configurations, and then you should be able to run it again. But let's access Nginx Proxy Manager. It's real simple. So whatever number you put before 81, in my case I put 810, that's how we're going to access this. So there's two ways you can do it. Now there's a couple ways I guess you could do it, but first would just be using your IP address. So if you don't know your IP address, you can click up here on Widgets, make sure system health is checked, and then whatever's here under LAN 1 is probably your IP address. So in my case, I'm going to type in 192.168.86.60:810. So let me just do that. What sometimes will happen, though, is that it'll actually type in HTTPS, and that's not what you want. You need to make sure that in the beginning it says HTTP:// and then it will work if you're getting an error. The other way you can also try and access it is using your server name .local. So my server name is Night Vision, so I could also type in nightvision.local:810, and that will also work. But if I type in HTTPS, like I said, it is no bueno. It is not going to work. Let's go back here. And then, yeah, you're all set up, and you can kind of follow the instructions that they have here. So they'll tell you this is the default user and admin information. That's how you would log in. There's a ton of good information on Nginx Proxy Manager's website, so I definitely recommend scrubbing through some of this stuff. I bet that they answer a lot of questions that you might have. And I think they also have a GitHub community, another good place. So yeah, I'll just log in real quick. So the default name is admin@example.com, and then the password is change me, almost like they're trying to tell you something there. And then they actually make you make a user. So I'm going to type in my legal name, volume, and then my legal nickname that I have to use in my passport is data21. That is my legal nickname. And then volume data21@gmail.com is my email. And then I'll click save, and then it should ask me to make a password. So the current password is just change me, all lowercase. I'm going to make a new safe password. I'm going to type in bitwarden password generator. That's pretty good. Password generator, and then I'll come down and I will click regenerate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, you can't do 14 characters? No, we bumped this up. We're 18. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Copy this guy, and I will paste that into my new and confirmed password places. Make sure you know that password. I am never going to remember that password. That is gone. I will have to nuke this. But there you go. We've got a user who is an administrator. If I wanted to add a website, I could do that. Again, this is not a tutorial. I'm just trying to give you a little overview. So I would add a proxy host, and let's just say my domain. Let's just say I owned theylive.com. What I want to do is add photos.theylive.com. So I would do that, and then I would just decide on whether my program is HTTP or HTTPS. If you're trying to figure that out, you want to do HTTPS if you can. But for example, Nginx Proxy Manager, remember how HTTPS didn't work? That means if I use the HTTPS scheme here, it's probably also not going to work. So in this case, if I was just to link this to Nginx Proxy Manager, I would have to choose HTTP as the scheme. The IP address is going to be the same as my Synology NAS, 192.168.86.60, and then the forward port is going to be 810, and then I would click block exports. And then I would come over here to SSL. This is a really big advantage of Nginx Proxy Manager over the Synology reverse proxy is you can just click request new SSL certificate, force SSL, I agree to the let's encrypt terms of service, and you've got yourself a new certificate. When you really get into this, there are other ways of doing this. You could argue there are even better ways of doing this. Like you could make SSL certificates work for all of your subdomains, so you don't have to make a new SSL for each one. There's a lot to get into with SSL, but Nginx Proxy Manager makes this process very simple for you. And that's the gist of how this would work. I'm going to cancel because it will just error because I do not own theylive.com. I don't think anyone owns that site yet. But if you happen to get some sunglasses and see some weird stuff, I would suggest you buy the domain and post up photos because your life could change dramatically if you get those sunglasses. But that's it. So that's Nginx Proxy Manager. The other thing you would have to do is set it up. Again, I've done 3 networking videos, so you might want to check those out if you're interested in doing a reverse proxy. It might even convince you that the reverse proxy is not the way to go for you. The short of it, the gist of it though, if you were curious, would be, let's just say you owned theylive.com, and maybe you even want to forward a subdomain here. So let's just say you want to be able to access Synology photos from theylive.com. So you would create a subdomain called photos.theylive.com, right? You would create a CNAME record called photos.theylive.com, and you would point that CNAME record to theylive.com. And then under your theylive.com settings, you would create an A record, and you would create an A record for theylive.com, and A records require you to point to an IP address, and that IP address is just going to be the IP address of your home router, which you can find by Googling what is my IP address. That'll show you that address. Just make sure you're not on a VPN, otherwise you're going to get the VPN's IP address. And then after that, in your home router, what you would have to do is what is called port forwarding, because it's going to block anybody trying to get into your home network, which is a great thing, great for security. And if you're starting to do reverse proxy stuff, make sure you understand the security implications of that, especially like you better make sure that your stuff is really secure, especially your Synology NAS. So in your router, you would then say, hey, any traffic that's trying to access port 80, forward that to my Synology NAS's port, not ORPed, port 800. And then any traffic that wants to access port 443, forward that to my Synology NAS's port 4430, and you would be good. And then all of that web traffic is going to be forwarded to your Nginx Proxy Manager. So and remember, I'm just using 800 and 443 because those are the examples that I used in my Docker compose.yaml file over here, this guy. I replaced 80 with 800 and 4430. If you just have them, where is it? I lost it. If you were to just have 80.2 Synology's port 80 and 443.2 Synology's port 443, that's going to go to the Synology NAS's reverse proxy. So just a little heads up there. But yeah, that is the gist of how that would work. And this tutorial is pretty much over, but I'm going to do one little advanced tip since this video is probably pretty short. If you really just went through the install, that should have been pretty quick. And that is using Docker names. If you look around, there's so much that you can look up with reverse proxies. You definitely want to look up SSL certificates, wildcards, all that stuff. But one thing that you'll notice that's pretty Docker specific is when you add a proxy host, you'll notice that some people actually use a name. So let's say, for example, on my Synology NAS, if I look under projects, I've got Woogle. So if I go to containers, I've got one called Woogle Search. What I could theoretically do is use the name Woogle Search and then whatever port I have set up for Woogle. So to access Woogle, I think it's on port 15,000. Is that right? It sure is. I got Woogle right here. So horrible colors. I really need to change that color combo. So this will actually not work. But you'll see this everywhere. People say you can use the Docker name. and you have to set it up with Docker networking. So I will try and show that to you really quickly. The way that that would work is your programs can be on more than one network. So this is going to start to get a little bit confusing, but see if you can stick with me. So right now I've got these two containers, Nginx Proxy Manager and Woogle. They're on my home network, right? Because I can access them with my home network. I can type in, my Synology NAS's IP address and then their port numbers, and they work. So that means that they are on my home network. But they're also on a Docker network. So Docker applications will actually create their own, typically they'll create their own network. So in this case, Nginx Proxy Manager created one called Nginx Proxy Manager _ default. Woogle created one called Woogle default. What I could do if I wanted to though, is I can add my own network. So let's just call this one volume data 21. That is the name of my network. Fine, you wanted something cooler? Let's call it, you want something cooler? Let's just call it Roddy Piper. So that is the name of my network. So I'll just click apply, leave everything as default. And then I can I can click on Roddy Piper, manage, and I can add both of these containers to that network. So these are now part of 3 different networks. They're part of their own Docker network that they've created, but they're also part of the Roddy Piper network, which means they get their own Docker IP address and their own port number, which is a little much. I'm not really going to get into it. But since they're both on the Roddy Piper network, that means that Nginx Proxy Manager can talk to Woogle through a Docker network. And the cool thing about Docker networks is that they can talk to each other with just the Docker names. So if I go under container, Woogle Search's name is Woogle Search, not Woogle. So I could go into Nginx Proxy Manager and just make sure that it's called Woogle Search, and now it's going to find it. The only difference here, though, what always kind of got me that I never really could figure out was the port number. I would always use the port fit, so I would always use that first port number because that's how I access it. But that's actually not the port that it's looking for. What it's actually looking for is its Docker port number. So if I double click, if I'm under container, now let me go to project, Woogle, YAML configurations, I can see that I mapped it to port 15,000, but its original port is 5,000. And this is actually its own Docker port. I know this doesn't make a lot of sense yet, but this is actually the port that it's looking for. It's not looking for that first one that we normally use. It's actually going to look for port 5000. So that is the forwarded port that I would use there. And since I access Woogle via HTTP, it's a not set up for HTTPS, that's what I would use. And that's basically how you would be able to use a Docker network if you wanted to start identifying these programs by their Docker names. That's how that would work out. I know that's a little bit advanced. Hopefully that helps you out. One day, I'm not going to do a networking video anytime real soon, I don't think, but maybe the next one I do will be on Docker networking because it's actually very interesting. But yeah, that is how that works. That is the extended Nginx Proxy Manager install. There is so much to this stuff. Go out there, look up other people's tutorials and guides. If you're getting into reverse proxy stuff, it's a little bit tricky at first. It's a little bit complicated, but once you get it going, it's not that bad. So good luck to you.